In 1862, English-born artist Alfred Waud came to Charlestown, and on the high ground in the yard of the home Cassilis, he drew Charlestown as it lay out before him. He had come to this country first to draw theater scenery, but then he drew the Civil War all through to its end in 1865 for Harpers Weekly. On October 16, 1862, a month after both armies tangled mortally like great dragons around Sharpsburg, Maryland, encampments sprinkled the Jefferson County countryside, men of the Confederacy lounging in the lap of a beautiful autumn. Suddenly was the blast of battle as some 5,500 Federals under General Winfield Hancock crossed the river at Harpers Ferry, pushing towards Charlestown, challenging the many miles of snake-like picket line guided by Colonel Thomas Munford, who was known for his bravery and who over a year ago left his farm in Bedford County, Virginia, in the worn hands of his 83 enslaved workers. At the old fairground just east of Charlestown, Hancock's batteries furiously faced Captain Chew's and the Richmond guns of Captain Benjamin Smith. But the overwhelming Federals ground them down for the next 4 hours. Smith fell with a shell-mangled foot, was carried down Washington Street, and soon was prostrated on the Rutherford's dining room table as town doctors Mason and Cordell were busy amputating his foot. The next day, the rascally Federal Sergeant Charles Fuller and many others under orders came looking for laid-up men like Smith all over Charlestown, with a surprising turn of good luck for Smith. Confederate Colonel Munford's long defensive picket line across the county began to retreat in front of Federal General Hancock's thousands as they made their way up the road from Harpers Ferry to Charlestown. Winfield Hancock was from outside Philadelphia and was later praised as pure gold by future President Rutherford Hayes and as outstanding by the Union's equally outstanding finisher commander, U.S. Grant. Hancock reported that day, "On the 16th instant, I marched toward Charlestown, Virginia with my division of about 4,000 and 1,500 men of other divisions. The advance of our column encountered the enemy's pickets beyond Halltown, drove them in, and pursued until within short artillery range of the high ground this side of Charlestown." George Baylor, from a county farm family, a peacetime teacher and leader in the 12th Virginia Cavalry, was there and wrote later, "We remained at Halltown when a column of the enemy under General Hancock advanced, and after a brisk fight just east of Charlestown, our small force of cavalry under Colonel Munford was driven back." At the old fairground just east of town, 2 batteries then locked in an artillery duel that lasted 4 hours. Hancock reported, "Our horse artillery battery, supported by Captain M.A. Reno's 1st Cavalry, then engaged the enemy, who opened fire from 4 guns and deployed dismounted cavalry as skirmishers on their front and flanks." Roger Preston Chew lived at the family home on Cabletown Road called Hermitage before the war, and commanded his renowned horse artillery for the Confederacy. He wrote of what happened next at the fairground. "Here a section of Chew's battery, under Lieutenant J.W. Carter, and 2 guns of the Richmond howitzers, a 3rd company under Captain B.H. Smith, were placed in position and opened on the enemy, who had planted their batteries on the hill about 3/4 of a mile below, known as Butler's Hill. A severe engagement between the artillery on either side took place at this point, although the enemy were greatly superior in number and guns." Young Richard Rutherford recalled later, "They clashed hard on the hill just below our house. We all had to take to the cellar and stay there nearly all day, as shells and balls were thick and fast. After the clash, my brother and I picked up 6 or 7 shells that had fallen in the next yard, in line with, but a bit short of our house." Munford reported on Smith's bravery. "With 4 pieces of artillery admirably handled, these gallant officers and men held at bay for 4 hours the advance of McClellan's grand army, and only retired when their ammunition was exhausted. Captain Smith at one time, with but 2 guns, contended with 16 guns of the enemy, and, while making the splendid defense, lost his foot as his last piece was retiring from the field." The Confederate cavalry are driven in retreat through Charlestown, past the Rutherfords, and with them the wounded Captain Smith. Munford wrote, "The brigade, consisting of the 12th, 7th, 6th, and part of the 2nd, was held to support the picket, and when the cavalry retired through the town, several members of the 12th Cavalry were wounded. We fell back gradually, skirmishing with them and then disputing every foot of ground. The Federals controlled Charlestown by evening of the 16th. General McClellan himself arrived in Charlestown, ordering a withdrawal of Federal cavalry to guard the roads and sending scouting parties west. Unionist resident Horatio Riddle, an insurance agent whose family lived at Mrs. Rebecca Hunter's at the edge of Charlestown, and an intelligent Negro who had just arrived, having fled waiter duty with the Virginia 7th Cavalry. Both reported to Hancock. Large Confederate numbers in Bunker Hill to the west, moving eastward towards Charlestown as part of the overall Confederate withdrawal from the area. October 17th. The fate of Benjamin Smith. Before leaving Charlestown at 2 p.m. on the 16th, Hancock appointed Colonel J.R. Brooke of the 53rd Pennsylvania Volunteers to send men into Charlestown and arrest Confederates. About 100 officers and soldiers of the Confederate Army, mostly surgeons, hospital attendants, convalescents, and sick, were found. One manhunter, Sergeant Charles Fuller of the 61st New York Infantry, who would be wounded at Gettysburg the next year, spotted something suspicious at the Rutherfords' house. 2 weeks earlier, this same Fuller with his buddy Sergeant Frank Garland had a scare. Against orders, they ventured beyond their picket line at Bolivar Heights to find some food. They both bounded like terror-stricken circus acrobats over a farm fence upon seeing rebel cavalry, which was, in fact, some horse-backed local African-American men who kept laughing and laughing at them cowering in the bush. They then found food. A modest, red-cheeked girl had agreed to fill their haversacks with fresh apples for a price, but only by cutting the apples with Captain Nathan C. Bull did they avoid punishment. Fuller had his own freewheeling idea of what following orders meant. Richard Rutherford wrote, Captain Smith had his foot nearly shot off and was brought into our house. As the Confederates were falling back, he was left with us. One of his men, by the name of Red, was left to nurse him. Dr. Mason and Dr. Cordell operated on his foot on our dining room table the same day, taking off a little more of his foot. Red was taking a basin of water into the operation for the doctors when Sergeant Fuller saw Smith's assistant on the porch of the Rutherford home. Fuller and his men swooped down on the porch, grabbed Red to take him away. Richard Rutherford recalled that Fuller then faced a true authority. He wrote, My mother rushed out and explained to them that the man was nursing his captain and they must not take him. One of Fuller's men said, But suppose he gets away? My mother replied, Then you can take me. So, Fuller let Red and Smith stay. Fuller and the others in that 61st New York Regiment camped that night near Charlestown. The next day, he and some of his friends went to the nearby hanging site of John Brown before returning to Bolivar Heights. The Federals gave up on collecting all these men like Smith. 26 were sent to the Provost Marshal at Harpers Ferry, and 38 wounded and unable to be removed were paroled. Time did not permit the paroling of all who were severely wounded, as they were scattered throughout the town, requiring more time than they had for the purpose. Richard Rutherford wrote, Captain Smith and Red stayed with us until he was able to get around on crutches. This indestructible Benjamin Hodges Smith, Jr. fought the following summer at Gettysburg, manned artillery at Spotsylvania in May 1864, was captured, sent to Fort Delaware, paroled, and was present, always with the one good foot, at the surrender at Appomattox, April 9, 1865. And over the years, he visited the Rutherfords several times in gratitude.